Here's a refined version of your transcript with improved clarity, flow, and impact. The liberal TV host's voice cut sharply through the room. Take it off. It wasn't a question. It was a command. All eyes turned toward Karoline Leavitt, the young, unapologetically faithful leader standing at the heart of the press conference. Her simple, gleaming necklace, a symbol of her faith, had suddenly become the center of controversy. The air grew tense. The host's demand wasn't just about jewelry. It was an attempt to humiliate, to force her into a corner. But instead of shrinking, Karoline stood her ground, poised and unwavering. "You want me to take it off?" she asked, her voice steady. "My faith, that's what this necklace represents. My belief in God, my strength. And you're asking me to remove it because you disagree with it?" Her words weren't defensive, they weren't spoken in anger or defiance. They were calm, measured, a quiet challenge that reframed the entire moment. The room held its breath. Even those who agreed with the host shifted uncomfortably. But Karoline, she didn't flinch. Who was Karoline Leavitt? A fighter, a leader, a woman who stood firm in her convictions. She had risen through the ranks, defying expectations at every turn. She spoke for those who felt silenced, championed values that many were afraid to defend, and carried herself with grace even in the face of hostility. She wasn't born into privilege. She wasn't handed a platform. She built it. From high school debates to political rallies, she had faced resistance at every stage of her journey. Yet she had learned early on that standing up for her beliefs sometimes meant becoming a target. And still, she stood. That day, in front of flashing cameras and skeptical reporters, she proved why. "I'm sorry if my necklace makes you uncomfortable," she continued, her voice unwavering. "But I wonder, why does it offend you so much? Are you really upset about a piece of jewelry? Or is it what it stands for?" The energy in the room shifted. She held the small pendant between her fingers, lifting it slightly. "This isn't just an accessory," she said. "It's a reminder of the strength I've received in my darkest hours, of the values I strive to live by: love, kindness, the belief that every single person has inherent worth, regardless of whether they share my faith or not." The host, who had been prepared for a fight, found himself at a loss for words. He had intended to break her composure, but instead, she had exposed his bias, not with hostility, but with truth. "You told me to take it off," she said. "As if my faith is something I can remove as easily as you think. But it's not a decoration. It's not something I put on in the morning and take off at night. It's who I am. It shapes every decision I make, every policy I stand for, every interaction I have." She scanned the room, her gaze unwavering. "And I say this knowing full well that not everyone believes the same," she continued. "And that's okay. Because unity isn't about making everyone the same, it's about respecting the differences that make us who we are." A hush fell over the room. Reporters, producers, even the host himself seemed momentarily disarmed. "I wear this necklace not because I think my faith makes me better than anyone else," she finished, "but because it reminds me to be better. Better than I was yesterday. Better to my friends, my family, even to strangers. And if that offends you, maybe it's not my necklace that's the issue. Maybe it's something only you can reconcile." The liberal host opened his mouth to respond, but found no words. Cameras flashed, pens scribbled, but the moment had already been won. Some called it a victory for Karoline. Others called it a victory for something even greater: faith, resilience, and the courage to stand strong without tearing others down in the process. And as for the necklace, it stayed right where it belonged. After a moment of tense silence, the host cleared his throat and attempted to regain control of the narrative. "This isn't about faith," he finally said, forcing a smirk. "It's about separating religion from politics." Karoline tilted her head, slightly, her expression thoughtful rather than combative. "But that's exactly the problem," she said. "You claim to want diversity of thought, but when someone expresses a belief that doesn't fit your worldview, you demand they erase it. If we're truly going to have open discussions, that means respecting all voices, not just the ones you agree with." The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement. Even a few reporters, who were typically quick to challenge her, seemed intrigued by her response. The host shifted in his chair. He had expected defiance, anger, or even a defensive retreat. Instead, Karoline had disarmed him with calm reasoning. He was losing control of the moment, and he knew it. "You have every right to your faith," he pressed, attempting to recover. "But should it really be front and center in public discourse?" Karoline smiled, but there was steel in her voice when she answered. "My faith doesn't dictate that others must believe as I do," she said. "It simply guides the way I treat people, the way I lead, the way I stand up for what's right. If that makes people uncomfortable, maybe it's because we've forgotten what true tolerance looks like." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. The kind of silence that forces reflection. Across social media, the moment was already spreading like wildfire. Clips of the exchange were being shared at lightning speed with captions like "Karoline Leavitt shuts down faith-shaming" and "Courage under fire." Supporters praised her for standing firm, while even some critics acknowledged the grace with which she had handled the attack. The network executives, watching from behind the scenes, shifted uncomfortably. They had given the host free rein, assuming he would expose Karoline as extreme or unreasonable. Instead, she had made him appear intolerant and dismissive. The backlash against him was growing. Sponsors began pulling their ads. Viewers flooded the station with complaints. Within hours, the pressure became unbearable. By the next morning, the network released a statement. The host had been suspended, pending further review. Behind closed doors, executives debated whether they could afford to keep him at all. His credibility was shattered. Meanwhile, Karoline carried on as if nothing had changed. She continued speaking, advocating, and leading. But those who had witnessed that moment knew it had been a turning point. It wasn't just about a necklace. It was about the right to believe, to stand firm, to refuse to be silenced. And in the end, it wasn't Karoline Leavitt who had been stripped of anything. It was the man who had tried to take away her voice. In the days that followed, the fallout from the exchange continued to ripple across the media landscape. News outlets scrambled to cover the backlash, some defending the host, while others acknowledged Karoline's unwavering stance as a defining moment in modern political discourse. The network, once a staunch supporter of its liberal TV host, found itself caught in an impossible position. His words had ignited a controversy too large to ignore. Advertisers threatened to pull funding, and even some of his longtime viewers turned against him, accusing him of crossing a line that shouldn't have been breached. Behind the scenes, meetings were held in hushed conference rooms. Damage control plans were drawn up only to be scrapped when public pressure continued to mount. Executives realized that no amount of PR spin could undo what had been done. The host had not only embarrassed himself, he had inadvertently elevated Karoline to a national platform far larger than before. By the end of the week, the network made its decision. The host was officially fired. The announcement was swift and impersonal, a single paragraph released to the press. Effective immediately, host's name will no longer be a part of our network. We remain committed to respectful and inclusive discussions, and we regret that recent events have detracted from our mission. Karoline's response? A simple post on social media. Faith isn't something you take off when it's inconvenient. It's what carries you through life's greatest challenges. Stand firm. Always. Her supporters rallied around her. Even those who hadn't paid much attention to her before were now listening. What had started as an attempt to humiliate her had become a testament to her strength and conviction. The former host, now without a platform, tried to salvage his reputation with a few media appearances, claiming he had been canceled for simply voicing his opinion. But the damage was already done. No amount of backtracking or reframing could undo the fact that he had been the one attempting to silence someone else, and the public had seen it. As the weeks passed, Karoline Leavitt's influence continued to grow. What was meant to be a moment of public humiliation had transformed into an undeniable victory, not just for her, but for the values she represented. More people tuned in. To hear her speak, more invitations flooded her inbox. And her message of faith, resilience, and unwavering conviction reached further than ever before. Meanwhile, the former TV host struggled to find footing in a world that had so quickly moved on without him. His attempts to rebrand himself as a victim of so-called cancel culture failed to gain traction. The truth was clear to the public. He hadn't been silenced for his beliefs. He had been held accountable for his actions. His former colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to defend what was now seen as an indefensible moment of intolerance. Karoline, however, refused to dwell on his downfall. Instead, she remained focused on her work, using the experience to reinforce her mission. When asked about the incident in interviews, she never spoke with bitterness or anger. Instead, she used it as a lesson, a reminder that faith and principles should never be compromised, no matter how intense the opposition. Her words resonated beyond politics. Even those who didn't share her beliefs found themselves admiring the grace with which she had handled the situation. In a time where public figures often responded to attacks with more aggression, she had chosen a different path, one of strength through composure, of conviction without hostility. And so, the moment that was meant to diminish her had only made her stronger. Her critics had underestimated her, thinking she would crumble under pressure. Instead, she had emerged as a powerful voice, unshaken and unapologetic. As she prepared for her next speech, this time to a sold-out crowd, she took a moment to adjust the small necklace around her neck. It was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a testament to her journey, a symbol of the very thing that had carried her through: faith. And with that, she stepped onto the stage, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that no one, not a TV host, not the media, not even the loudest critics, could take away what truly mattered. As Karoline stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted in applause. She took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. Just weeks ago, she had been the target of an attempt to shame her, to make her doubt herself, to silence her. But instead, she stood here now, stronger than ever. She approached the microphone, her hands resting lightly on the podium. The cameras were rolling. The world was watching. But she wasn't nervous. She had spoken the truth once, and she would do it again. "Thank you," she began, her voice steady and warm. "Not just for being here tonight, but for believing in something greater than yourselves, for believing in the power of faith, in the power of standing for what is right, even when it's difficult." The audience listened intently. Some nodded, others wiped away a tear. They had seen how she had handled the confrontation. They had seen the grace with which she had responded, and they had been inspired. "In recent weeks, I've been asked many times how I felt in that moment when my faith was challenged so publicly," she continued. "And my answer is simple. I wasn't afraid. Because my faith is not just something I wear around my neck. It's something I carry in my heart." A wave of applause rippled through the crowd. There are people in this world who will tell you that in order to fit in order to be accepted, you need to set aside your values. That faith has no place in politics, no place in leadership, no place in our future. She paused, scanning the room. But I am here to tell you that they are wrong. The applause grew louder, but she held up a hand, signaling for silence. Because faith is not a weakness, it is not a burden. It is not something to be ashamed of. It is a source of strength, a guiding light. And when we stand firm in what we believe, when we refuse to compromise our values just to please the crowd, we become unshakable. The energy in the room was electric. The audience could feel her conviction, and it stirred something deep within them. She smiled, glancing down for a brief moment at the small necklace that had become the center of so much controversy. It was still there, shining under the stage lights just as it always would be. "So tonight I challenge you all," she said, her voice lifting with passion. "I challenge you to stand firm in your beliefs, to never let the world convince you to be less than who you truly are, to speak the truth even when it is unpopular, to wear your faith, whether it's in your heart or around your neck, with pride." The audience rose to their feet, the sound of applause echoing through the venue like a thunderous wave. As Karoline stepped back from the podium, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning.